I never imagined that the man I had spent nearly 15 years loving could look me in the eye, smile as if everything was perfectly normal, and hide something so devastating that it would completely shatter every memory I had built with him. My name is Claire Bennett, and until 8 months ago, I thought I had what most people spend their entire lives searching for. A stable marriage, a beautiful home in Connecticut, financial security, and a husband who I believed loved me. At 47 years old, I wasn't naive enough to think marriage was perfect. I knew relationships changed. I knew people changed. I knew love didn't always look like the fairy tales people sold in movies. But I believed one thing with absolute certainty. Trust mattered more than anything. And I trusted Daniel. I trusted him so completely that I never once questioned where our money was going, why he suddenly became protective over his phone, or why every conversation about our future seemed to end with him changing the subject. I thought he was stressed. I thought work was overwhelming him. I thought marriage had simply entered one of those quiet seasons couples go through. I was wrong. Completely wrong. Because while I was busy trying to save our marriage, my husband was quietly building another life behind my back. And by the time I found out the truth, he had already given away almost everything we had built together to another woman, his ex-wife. But what Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his grandmother had made a decision months earlier that would change everything. And in the end, I wasn't the one left with nothing. They were. But to understand how everything fell apart, you need to understand who Daniel really was. When I met Daniel Harper, I was 32 years old and rebuilding my life after spending years working 80-hour weeks as a corporate financial consultant in Boston. I had built a reputation for being disciplined, independent, careful. I didn't trust people easily, especially men. My father had cheated on my mother for nearly 10 years before she discovered the truth, and watching her break apart emotionally taught me one lesson early. Never depend on anyone financially. So I built my own life, my own career, my own future. Then Daniel appeared. He was charming in ways that immediately disarmed people. Tall, confident, the kind of man who could make an entire room laugh without trying. He owned a growing logistics company and had recently finalized a divorce from his college sweetheart, Vanessa. He told me the marriage had ended because they had simply grown apart. No betrayal. No scandal. Just life moving in different directions. At least that's what he told me. And I believed him. 3 years later, we got married in a small private ceremony overlooking Cape Cod. I remember standing there thinking I had finally found peace. Daniel constantly told me how different I was from Vanessa. He said she cared only about money, status, luxury, appearances. He told me I was the first woman who ever truly understood him. For years, I believed every word. We built a comfortable life together. No children. That had been a painful chapter neither of us spoke about much. After 2 miscarriages, doctors told me pregnancy complications made carrying to term unlikely. Daniel had seemed supportive. He held my hand during the hospital visits, sat beside me during endless appointments, told me family wasn't about children. It was about partnership. At the time, I loved him even more for saying that. But looking back now, I wonder if he had emotionally checked out long before I realized it. The first sign something was wrong happened 2 years ago. It was small. So small most people would ignore it. Daniel suddenly began taking private calls outside. At first, I assumed business. His company had expanded aggressively, and he often dealt with overseas suppliers. But then I noticed patterns. Every Tuesday evening, exactly 7:25, he would excuse himself, take the call outside, stay gone 15 minutes, return acting strangely distant. I asked him once. He smiled casually. European clients. Different time zones. Simple explanation. Made perfect sense. So I ignored it. Months passed. Then strange bank transfers started appearing. Again. Small enough to avoid suspicion. $5,000. $7,000. $10,000. I handled most household budgeting, but Daniel had separate business accounts, so I assumed these transfers were connected to company operations. One evening, I casually mentioned it. He froze. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed. Then he laughed. Expansion costs. You know how business works. Again. Perfectly reasonable explanation. Again. I let it go. Because trust makes people blind. And I trusted him. Then came Eleanor, Daniel's grandmother. Now Eleanor Harper was unlike anyone I had ever met. She was 86 years old and terrifyingly intelligent. The kind of woman who could dismantle someone emotionally with a single sentence. She had built the Harper family fortune decades earlier through real estate investments before passing management responsibilities to Daniel's father. Unlike the rest of the family, Eleanor never cared much for appearances. She valued character. And, surprisingly, she liked me immediately. Daniel once joked that Eleanor liked me more than she liked him. I thought he was exaggerating. Until I started noticing how differently she treated us. At family dinners, Eleanor constantly asked me about my career, my investments, my opinions. Meanwhile, she barely acknowledged Daniel. One Thanksgiving, she said something strange. Something I didn't understand at the time. We were drinking wine in her study while Daniel stepped outside. She stared directly at me, long enough to make me uncomfortable. Then she said quietly, Claire, intelligent women often mistake patience for loyalty. I laughed awkwardly. I'm not sure I understand. She didn't smile. You will eventually. I remember feeling unsettled. But Eleanor immediately changed the subject. I forgot about it. Or at least, I thought I had. Fast forward 8 months ago. It was a Friday afternoon. Rain hammered against the kitchen windows while I worked remotely reviewing client reports. Daniel had flown to Chicago supposedly for a logistics conference. I remember being irritated because he had canceled our anniversary dinner for the trip. 14 years married. And he barely acknowledged it. No flowers. No apology. Nothing. I tried convincing myself work pressure explained everything. Around 6 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. I answered. A woman's voice. Cold. Sharp. Confident. Claire Harper. Yes. A pause. Then words that instantly changed my life. I think you deserve to know your husband spent last night buying my penthouse. My entire body went cold. I remember standing so quickly my chair slammed backward. What? The woman laughed. A cruel laugh. Oh, so you didn't know. My chest tightened. Who is this? Another pause. Then she answered. Vanessa. I couldn't breathe. Daniel's ex-wife. The woman he claimed he hadn't spoken to in years. I gripped the kitchen counter so hard my fingers turned white. You're lying. Her voice grew almost amused. No, sweetheart. I'm not lying. Daniel bought me a penthouse in Miami yesterday. Cash. I felt nauseous. That's impossible. She laughed again. Is it? Check your husband's private accounts. My entire body trembled. I whispered. Why are you telling me this? Silence. Then words that cut deeper than anything else. Because he told me he's divorcing you next month. And I thought women should know when they're being replaced. The line disconnected. I stood frozen for what felt like hours. Rain crashing outside. Heart pounding violently. Mind refusing to process what I had just heard. No. Impossible. Daniel wouldn't do this. Not Daniel. Not my husband. Not after 14 years. I ran upstairs. Opened Daniel's office. Something I had never done without asking permission. I sat at his desk. Turned on his laptop. Entered the password I had known for years. And suddenly, my entire world collapsed. There were folders. Private financial records. Wire transfers. Property documents. Purchase agreements. Luxury condominium. Miami Beach. $3.8 million. Buyer listed. Daniel Harper. Secondary beneficiary. Vanessa Carter. My stomach turned violently. Then I found more. Transfer after transfer. Jewelry purchases. Vacation expenses. Luxury car lease agreements. Hotel reservations. Nearly $1.2 million transferred over 18 months. All connected to Vanessa. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. 14 years of marriage. And while I believed we were building a future together, my husband had been financing another woman's life behind my back. Then I found the final document. And this one destroyed me. Draft divorce agreement. Prepared by attorneys. 3 weeks old. My name printed clearly at the top. Asset division proposal. House transferred solely to Daniel. Retirement accounts frozen. Joint investments liquidated. I would walk away with almost nothing. There was even a handwritten note attached. Daniel's handwriting. Need this finalized before Eleanor updates estate documents. I stared at that sentence repeatedly. Need this finalized before Eleanor updates estate documents. What did that mean? Why was Eleanor involved? Why was Daniel rushing divorce proceedings? And then suddenly, I remembered what Eleanor said months earlier. Intelligent women often mistake patience for loyalty. She knew. Somehow. She knew. And I had a terrifying feeling. This betrayal was much bigger than an affair. Much bigger than divorce. Daniel wasn't just leaving me. He was trying to position himself for something. Something connected to Eleanor. Something involving money. A lot of money. That night I didn't sleep. I sat alone in our bedroom staring at the ceiling while 14 years of memories replayed endlessly in my mind. Every smile. Every anniversary. Every promise. Every lie. At 3:14 in the morning, my phone rang again. This time, it was Eleanor. And the first words she spoke sent chills down my spine. Claire. Her voice sounded unusually serious. I think it's time we discussed what Daniel doesn't know. I stared at my phone for nearly 5 seconds before answering. At 3 in the morning, under normal circumstances, an 86-year-old woman calling usually meant tragedy. My hands were still shaking from everything I had discovered inside Daniel's office. The hidden accounts. The Miami penthouse. The divorce papers. The realization that the man I had trusted for 14 years had quietly been dismantling my entire future while I slept beside him every night. I finally answered. Eleanor. Her breathing sounded steady. Calm. Almost as if she had expected me to uncover everything tonight. Are you alone, Claire? I sat upright against the bed. Yes. A pause. Then her voice hardened. Good. Because what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this conversation. A strange wave of anxiety crawled up my spine. I looked toward the bedroom door instinctively, even though Daniel was supposedly in Chicago. Something about Eleanor's tone frightened me. I found documents tonight, I said quietly. Another pause. Then she answered without surprise. I know. My chest tightened. You know? Yes. Silence filled the room for several seconds. Finally, she spoke again. Daniel has been stealing from this family for nearly 2 years. The words hit harder than I expected. Stealing. Yes. I heard papers moving on her side of the call. Then Eleanor continued. 6 months ago, I began noticing irregular movements through several family investment accounts connected to the Harper Trust. Small withdrawals disguised as administrative transfers. I tried processing what she was saying. Daniel moved family money? More than family money. She exhaled sharply. He's been moving assets to offshore holdings, liquidating inherited property shares, and transferring large sums through accounts linked to Vanessa. I felt sick all over again. So Vanessa wasn't simply an affair. She was involved. Actively involved. How long have you known? Long enough. I tightened my grip on the phone. Why didn't you tell me? Her answer came instantly. Because I needed proof. That sentence unsettled me. What kind of proof? The kind that destroys people permanently. I sat speechless. I had always known Eleanor Harper was intelligent. But hearing the cold precision in her voice made me realize something. This woman had been planning something. Quietly. patiently. For months. She continued speaking. I suspected Daniel resumed contact with Vanessa almost 2 years ago. But he told me they never spoke. Eleanor almost laughed. Claire, men like Daniel lie best when they believe the person listening wants to trust them. The truth in that sentence cut deep. I felt humiliated. Like my entire marriage had been built on performance. Then Eleanor said something that completely shifted the situation. Tomorrow morning at 9:30, I want you in Manhattan. I frowned. Why? Because my attorney needs to meet with you. I felt confusion rising. Attorney? Yes. Her voice lowered. And because I changed my will 4 months ago. The room suddenly felt smaller. What does that have to do with me? Silence. Then the sentence that changed everything. I removed Daniel entirely. I stopped breathing. What? He gets nothing. I thought I misheard her. Nothing. Correct. I stood up slowly, heart racing. Why are you telling me this? Her answer came quietly. Because I left everything to you. The silence that followed felt endless. I physically sat back down because my legs felt weak. No. This couldn't be real. What are you talking about? Eleanor spoke carefully. The Harper estate currently holds approximately $18.4 million in liquid assets, commercial properties, trust investments, and real estate holdings. I stared at the dark bedroom walls. 18 million. This didn't feel real. You left all of that to me? Yes. But why? Her answer surprised me. Because unlike Daniel, you possess character. I didn't know what to say. She continued. Daniel assumed I would eventually transfer controlling authority to him. He has spent nearly 2 years quietly positioning himself to inherit everything. The puzzle pieces suddenly began fitting together. The divorce papers. The rushed asset transfers. The handwritten note. Need this finalized before Eleanor updates estate documents. Daniel had planned everything. He wanted to strip me financially before Eleanor's death so he could control the inheritance without legal complications. My entire marriage had become part of a financial strategy. I whispered quietly. He was waiting for you to die. Eleanor answered coldly. Yes. A wave of disgust passed through me. She spoke again. I'm giving you one opportunity, Claire. What opportunity? To decide whether you wish to walk away quietly. Her tone changed. Or whether you want him destroyed. I had never heard an 86-year-old woman sound so terrifying. And strangely, for the first time all night, I wasn't crying anymore. I was angry. Very angry. I asked quietly, what exactly are you planning? She answered with chilling certainty. Justice. The next morning I drove into Manhattan before sunrise. I barely remember the drive. The city's skyline blurred together as exhaustion mixed with rage. By 9:28, I stood outside one of the most prestigious legal firms in Midtown. Silverman and Rhodes. 42nd floor. Private conference suite. The receptionist escorted me inside without asking questions. And there she was. Eleanor Harper. Perfect posture. Elegant gray suit. Sharp eyes studying me carefully. Beside her sat a man probably in his early 60s. Expensive watch. Immaculate suit. Cold professional expression. Eleanor gestured toward the chair. Sit down, Claire. I obeyed. The attorney extended his hand. Richard Silverman. I recognized the name immediately. One of New York's most feared corporate litigators. Why would someone like him be involved? Before I could ask, Richard opened a thick file resting on the table. What I saw inside made my stomach twist. Photographs. Bank records. Property transfers. Private investigators' reports. Hundreds of pages. I looked toward Eleanor. She watched quietly. Richard began speaking. For the last 7 months, we have been documenting Daniel Harper's unauthorized movement of protected trust assets. I blinked. Protected trust assets? Richard slid several documents toward me. Your husband illegally transferred approximately $6.2 million from family-controlled holdings. I stared in disbelief. $6 million. He continued. In addition to financial theft, we have evidence linking Daniel Harper and Vanessa Carter to fraudulent concealment, tax evasion, asset laundering, and conspiracy to illegally redirect estate-controlled holdings. The room felt surreal. I whispered, "How long has this investigation been happening?" Eleanor answered, "Long enough." Richard leaned forward. "Mrs. Bennett." I noticed he deliberately avoided calling me Mrs. Harper. "Interesting," he continued. "Mr. Harper believes his grandmother's estate remains assigned solely to him." I looked at Eleanor. She nodded. "He doesn't know I changed everything," Richard continued. "3 months ago, Eleanor legally transferred future controlling authority to you." My heart pounded. "What exactly does that mean?" He calmly replied, "If Eleanor passes tomorrow." He pushed another folder toward me. "You become sole beneficiary of $18.4 million. I stared silently. This was insane. Absolutely insane. Eleanor suddenly leaned closer. Then she said something I will never forget. "Claire." I met her eyes. "You have spent 14 years loving a man who viewed you as an obstacle." I felt tears forming. She continued, "He planned to abandon you with nothing." I nodded slowly. Pain building again. Then her expression hardened. "So I have one question." I swallowed. "What question?" She spoke with absolute clarity. "Would you like revenge?" The room became silent. For several seconds. Nobody moved. I thought about every hospital visit after my miscarriages. Every anniversary. Every promise. Every lie. The woman he financed behind my back. The divorce papers. The future he planned to steal from me. Then I asked quietly, "What happens if I say yes?" Richard Silverman smiled for the first time. A cold smile. The kind lawyers wear when they know someone's life is about to collapse. He opened another file and slid it across the table. I looked down, then froze. It was a federal fraud complaint. Daniel Harper's name listed clearly at the top. Below it, Vanessa Carter. 23 separate financial violations. Possible prison sentence. I looked back at Richard. He folded his hands calmly. "We can file this immediately." My pulse raced. Eleanor spoke softly. "Or..." She paused. "We wait." I frowned. Wait for what? Her answer came with terrifying precision. For Daniel to finalize his betrayal. I didn't understand. Richard explained. "Daniel returns tomorrow evening." I nodded slowly. Richard smiled again. "He believes next week he will serve divorce papers." I said nothing. Then Eleanor delivered the final piece. "We're hosting a family dinner tomorrow night." I stared at her. "And?" She leaned back calmly. "Daniel intends to announce his divorce publicly." My stomach tightened. How did she know that? Almost as if reading my thoughts, Eleanor answered. "Private investigators are useful." Then she looked directly into my eyes and smiled slightly. "But tomorrow." Her voice dropped lower. "You're going to ruin him in front of everyone he has ever manipulated." I stared silently. Heart pounding. Adrenaline rising. For the first time since learning the truth, I felt something stronger than pain. Power. Then Richard slowly reached inside the folder and handed me one final document. I read the first line, and my entire body froze. Because somehow, Daniel had done something even worse than I imagined. Far worse. I looked up at Richard, barely able to speak. "What is this?" His expression turned cold. "It appears your husband attempted to forge your signature." He paused. "On documents transferring ownership of your personal retirement accounts." I stopped breathing. Over $900,000. My entire retirement fund. Gone. Stolen. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. Daniel never planned to leave me anything. Not a single dollar. Not my savings. Not the house. Not my future. Nothing. He had spent 2 years preparing to erase me completely. I slowly looked toward Eleanor and said 4 words. For words that changed everything. I want him destroyed. The strangest thing about betrayal is not the pain. It is the clarity that comes after. For 14 years, I had loved Daniel Harper with the kind of loyalty people spend entire lifetimes searching for. I defended him when others questioned him. I supported him through business failures. I stood beside him during every financial setback. I sacrificed career opportunities when his company needed my attention more than my own ambitions. And somehow, while I believed I was protecting our future, he had been quietly planning to erase me from it. Not emotionally. Not temporarily. Completely. The drive home from Manhattan felt different. 24 hours earlier, I had been a wife desperately trying to understand why her marriage felt broken. Now, I was a woman preparing to watch the man who betrayed her destroy himself. Eleanor's plan was disturbingly simple. Do nothing. Let Daniel continue believing he had already won. Allow him to finalize every decision he had spent 2 years preparing. Then expose everything publicly. Not privately. Not through quiet legal letters. Not behind closed doors. Publicly. Humiliation. Consequences. Permanent destruction. The next evening I arrived at Eleanor Harper's estate precisely at 6:30. The Harper family mansion sat overlooking Long Island Sound, its enormous stone exterior glowing beneath soft evening lights. Luxury cars lined the private circular driveway. Inside, dozens of family members had already gathered. Executives connected to Harper Investments. Extended relatives. Longtime family friends. Even several board members tied to the Harper Trust. Daniel had chosen a large audience. He wanted witnesses. He wanted everyone present when he announced he was leaving me. What he didn't know. I wanted witnesses too. I stepped inside wearing the navy blue dress Daniel once said made me look unforgettable. Funny. Tonight he would remember it forever. Almost immediately I spotted Vanessa. Standing near the fireplace. Tall blonde hair. Expensive jewelry. Designer heels. And the smug expression of a woman who believed she had already won. So there she was. The woman my husband had secretly funded for 2 years. The woman living inside the Miami penthouse purchased with money Daniel helped steal. She noticed me immediately. And smiled. That smile said everything. She thought I was weak. She thought I knew nothing. Perfect. Exactly what I wanted. Then Daniel appeared. And somehow seeing his face hurt more than discovering the documents. He smiled casually. Walked toward me. Placed a hand against my lower back. The same familiar touch I had trusted for years. And whispered. Glad you came. The audacity nearly made me laugh. I smiled politely. Wouldn't miss tonight. He looked relieved. Of course he did. He thought I remained completely blind. Across the room, Eleanor sat quietly near the dining area, watching everything unfold with frightening patience. Beside her stood Richard Silverman, completely expressionless. The room slowly filled as servers delivered wine and appetizers. Conversations buzzed around us. Daniel remained unusually cheerful. Too cheerful. That told me everything. He was excited. Tonight represented victory in his mind. Nearly 40 minutes passed before Eleanor stood. The room immediately quieted. Everyone respected Eleanor Harper. She had built the family empire from nothing. At 86 years old, her authority remained absolute. She smiled toward the crowd. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Soft applause followed. Then she gestured toward Daniel. My grandson tells me he has important personal news he wishes to share. Daniel stood slowly. Straightened his expensive charcoal suit. Smiled confidently. And suddenly I understood something. He had rehearsed this. This wasn't impulsive. He planned this moment carefully. He lifted his wine glass. Thank you, Grandma. The room focused entirely on him. He turned toward me. Then placed on the performance of a lifetime. His voice became emotional. Almost practiced. Family means honesty. I felt sick hearing the word. Honesty. Coming from him. He continued dramatically. Sometimes life forces difficult decisions. Several relatives exchanged curious glances. Daniel sighed deeply, then looked directly at me. Claire and I have unfortunately reached a place where our marriage can no longer continue. Gasps spread softly across the room. He lowered his eyes dramatically, pretending sadness. Brilliant performance. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed him. He continued. After months of trying to repair things, lie. We both realize divorce is the healthiest path forward. Lie. And while this has been painful, lie. I believe sometimes people simply outgrow each other. I watched Vanessa smiling behind the guests. Of course. They thought this was the final act. Daniel finished speaking, then added one final sentence. A sentence that revealed exactly who he truly was. Thankfully, everything has been handled privately and respectfully. Respectfully. The man had stolen nearly $7 million. Forged my signature. Prepared to leave me financially ruined. And called it respectful. Soft, sympathetic murmurs filled the room. Daniel reached for my hand, trying to maintain appearances. I pulled away. The entire room noticed. His expression changed slightly. Confusion. Good. I stood slowly. Every heartbeat felt louder. Dozens of eyes watching. I smiled gently, then said calmly, "You're right, Daniel." The room remained silent. He relaxed immediately, believing I had accepted everything. I continued. Honesty matters. He smiled faintly. Big mistake. I looked toward the guests, then back at him. So, let's be honest. The atmosphere changed instantly. Daniel frowned slightly. I turned toward Vanessa, still smiling. Then I asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Would you like me to mention the Miami penthouse first? I paused. Or the $6.2 million you stole from your grandmother's trust fund? Silence. Absolute silence. Daniel's face drained instantly. Vanessa stopped smiling. Several guests stared in shock. Daniel laughed nervously. Claire, what are you talking about? I slowly reached inside my purse, removed the first document, held it high enough for everyone to see. Property purchase agreement. Miami Beach condominium. Buyer. Daniel Harper. Secondary beneficiary. Vanessa Carter. Whispers exploded around the room. Daniel stepped toward me. Lower voice. Aggressive now. Stop this. I smiled. No. Then I looked toward Vanessa. Tell them how much jewelry he bought you this year. Her confidence vanished instantly. Daniel's breathing quickened. This isn't funny. I nodded. You're correct. I turned toward the room again. Maybe everyone would prefer hearing about the offshore transfers instead. Eleanor finally stood. Her voice cut sharply through the chaos. Enough. The room fell silent again. Daniel turned toward her desperately. Grandma, she's confused. Eleanor's expression turned colder than I had ever seen. Am I confused too? Daniel froze. She stepped forward slowly. Elegant. Controlled. Terrifying. Then she spoke words that detonated everything. For 7 months I have documented every illegal transaction you made. Daniel physically staggered backward. No. Eleanor ignored him. You stole $6.2 million from family-controlled assets. Gasps filled the room again. Daniel pointed toward me. She's manipulating you. Eleanor stared coldly. No, Daniel. She paused deliberately. You manipulated everyone. Richard Silverman stepped forward carrying a thick legal file. Daniel's eyes widened instantly. He recognized me. That reaction told me everything. Richard spoke professionally. Daniel Harper. He removed several documents. You are being formally notified that evidence regarding financial fraud, asset laundering, trust theft, tax violations, and document forgery has already been submitted to federal investigators. Daniel went pale. Actually pale. The room erupted. Voices everywhere. Panic. Shock. Vanessa suddenly stepped backward toward the exit. Richard noticed immediately. And Vanessa Carter. She froze. You were named co-conspirator under 23 separate financial violations. Her face lost all color. She whispered, "No." Daniel turned violently toward Eleanor. "You can't do that." She stared directly into his eyes and calmly delivered the final blow. "Oh yes." A long pause. "I can." Daniel looked around desperately, his entire carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. Then he said something unbelievable. Something so pathetic I almost laughed. "Grandma, I'm family." Eleanor answered instantly. "No." She reached inside her savings, removed one final document, and handed it directly to me. Then she addressed everyone. "For months ago, I updated my estate documents." Daniel stared blankly. Eleanor continued. "Daniel Harper has been permanently removed as beneficiary." I watched terror spread across his face. "No." She pointed toward me. Every eye in the room shifted. Then she spoke the sentence that ended him completely. "Claire Bennett is sole heir to the Harper estate." The silence afterward felt almost supernatural. Daniel looked physically dizzy. His voice cracked. "You gave her everything?" Eleanor nodded once. $18.4 million. Vanessa gasped loudly. Daniel's knees literally buckled. He grabbed the dining table for balance. I walked toward him slowly. For 14 years I had stood beside this man. Loved him. Protected him. Believed in him. And now, for the first time, he looked small. Weak. Powerless. I leaned close enough that only he could hear me. Then whispered softly, "You spent 2 years trying to leave me with nothing." His eyes filled with panic. I smiled. "You should have checked who Grandma trusted." I stepped back. Security guards entered moments later. Richard had arranged everything. 2 men approached Vanessa. 2 moved toward Daniel. He looked broken. Completely broken. As officers entered through the front entrance carrying federal identification badges, I finally felt something strange. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Freedom. 3 months later, I signed the final divorce papers from my new office overlooking Manhattan. Daniel's company had collapsed. Federal charges remained active. Most family assets were recovered. Vanessa accepted a plea agreement. And Eleanor. Well, Eleanor visited every Friday for tea. Sometimes silence says more than conversation. One afternoon she smiled and asked me a question. "Any regrets?" I looked out toward the city skyline. Thought carefully. Then smiled back. "Only one." She raised an eyebrow. I laughed softly. I should have stopped trusting him years earlier. Eleanor nodded knowingly. Then she said something I think about often. "The most dangerous people are not those who betray us." She paused. "They are the ones we love enough to ignore the warning signs." 6 months later, I sold the Connecticut house, purchased a waterfront property in Maine, started a foundation helping women rebuild financially after divorce and financial abuse. And sometimes late at night, I think about Daniel, not with hatred, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Because betrayal teaches lessons comfort never can. He tried taking everything from me. My marriage, my future, my security, my dignity. Instead, he gave me freedom. $18 million. A second chance. And the single most satisfying moment of my entire life. Watching the man who underestimated me lose absolutely everything.